This is Charter Local Edition. My name is Brad Pomerantz, and we are joined today by Aric Nesbitt. He is the House Majority Floor Leader in the state of Michigan. We thank you so much for joining us, sir. Budget's been passed. Congratulations. It's always a feat to get a budget passed. How'd it go so well?
Well, thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me on.
Of course.
I appreciate being here. And really, you look at the last 5 years in Michigan, and we've made some great progress in our state. We went from $1.5 billion deficit and not barely able to make the match to bring down federal funding for our roads.
Right.
Large deficits. You had unfunded liabilities of up to $70 billion. And over the last several years, we've been able to balance our budgets early and on time. We've been able to pay down nearly $20 billion of unfunded liability, invest nearly $1.25 billion more into our roads and streets and bridges to make sure that people are able to get to work safely.
And let's talk about roads, because obviously it continues to be a source of contention in Michigan. As you know, the voters were presented with Proposition 1, and they said no in a big way, in a very significant way. Biggest defeat since the state constitution of 1963. But there's still an issue. And so there are many plans being floated about how to deal with roads and bridges. As we speak, as you know, this current state budget did dedicate about $400 million to roads, but it's one-time money. So the governor's a little concerned about whether that's enough for the continuing issue. Where do you go from here, sir?
Yeah, we need to get a little over $1 billion into roads and bridges in Michigan additional. We spent
Is that $1 billion a year?
Yeah, $1 billion a year additional.
Right.
So we spend about $3.5 billion a year on roads and bridges.
Right.
And with that $400 million, we'll get up to $3.9 billion.
Right.
We need to grow that to about $4.5 to $4.8 billion in the long term annual spending to get our roads back to good condition over the next 10 years. The House passed a plan that I think responds to the voters' concerns with how complicated the last proposal was.
Is this the Speaker's plan that was passed? As I understand the Speaker's plan, though, it would give, I guess, about $1 billion through 2019, which is a great start, arguably. But there's a concern that's still not enough.
It's and that's to grow it per year.
Right.
So you start off for next year under the plan, it'd be about $600 million.
Right.
The following year would be about $750 million.
Exactly. Okay. Right.
$850 million. And so you'd grow that to about $4.5 to $4.6 billion, which would really get us a good start in terms of fixing our roads. We prioritize spending first. We institute new reforms and mandates on warranty work and guarantees for our roads, to making sure those road contractors are building our roads right.
Right.
And then we also, in a few areas of both some corporate welfare programs, we direct that money to roads and transportation. We also, in some of the social welfare programs, redirect that money.
And let me ask you about that, because some of your friends on the Republican side are concerned about the fact that money's being taken from the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And they're big fans, for example, of economic development, revitalization. How would you respond to those folks?
Well, roads and bridges is economic development.
Well stated.
And that's helping goods get delivered and people get to work. And I think that's critically important when people come to visit our state.
Right.
We have a beautiful state, great shorelines, beautiful trees and outdoors, but our roads need to get fixed, and that needs to be our priority. And so taking on some of the corporate welfare and the status quo is always going to be a challenge.
Right.
But we have to be able to prioritize our spending. And my priorities, to be honest with you, are education and schools, our law enforcement, and transportation.
Some of your friends on the Democratic side are apoplectic about the question of whether the EITC would survive, because as I understand it, under the Speaker's plan, the EITC could go away.
Yep, and this is something where the federal government has an EITC at the federal level, which is very substantial. The state of Michigan did not have one until '08. And in 2008, it was instituted as part of a larger budget deal back then. It was 20% of the federal level was what the phase-in was supposed to be. In 2011, as part of the tax reform that we passed to make it flatter and fairer tax system, to stop double taxing our small businesses that are the engine of economic growth here in the state. And as you remember, we had double-digit unemployment rate just 6 years ago. Today we have a 5.6% unemployment rate, which is more of a 70% decrease than the high that it was in 2009. And so this is about $117 million a year, or it's about 6% of what the federal level is for the EITC. And it's people that don't pay income tax, and it's saying, you know what is important is making sure that we have an economy that drives forward, and that part of that is making sure we have good roads. And so we took on both corporate welfare and some of the social welfare
But let me
programs.
ask you, in the recent budget, the House side was able to get some really nice bipartisan support for the education budget.
99-10.
Which is really remarkable. So I'm wondering, could it be that you could replicate that model on this question of roads? Because boy, it's always nice to be able to go to the voters and say, this was bipartisan. And you know, this EITC really is upsetting your Democratic friends.
They did that in December. They passed a very broad bipartisan package that was defeated by voters 80-20.
But on the question of...
And that expanded the EITC.
Yeah,
and that
well
one.
Stated.
It expanded it back from 6% to 20%. So it had those giveaways in it, and it provided you know, increased spending for education, for local governments, for roads. People want a roads-only package, and that's what we're trying to work to concentrate on, is how do we make sure that our long-term funding is in place, that the money grows as inflation grows, to make sure we have the money put into roads, and that we prioritize our own spending up here in Lansing.
What about your friends in the Senate? Because as I understand it, they're going to come back and they're going to look to create some type of plan. We don't know if they're going to replicate the House plan. What we do know, and it was really interesting, when Prop 1 went down to a stinging defeat, all the polling said, we don't like Prop 1, but if you had a sales tax, just spiked it by 1%, just from 6 to 7%, and you dedicated that money to roads, we'd be cool with that.
Yeah.
So is that
It'd be
something?
about $1.8 billion.
Is that something, and that seems like a good number given the deficit in what you need for roads. Is that something that your friends in the Senate may take up? And if they do, what would you think of that?
I think after Prop 1, I don't think there's much of a willingness to go ahead and do another voter initiative. And with that voter initiative, you need to be able to get 2/3 of the vote. And to be honest, back in December,
you got 2/3 the other way.
Yeah,
right.
Well, and this is there's a supermajority of Republicans in the Senate, so they'd have 2/3 of the vote.
Okay.
In the House, we 63 out of the 110 members are Republicans. We don't have 2/3 of the vote, so it would have to be a compromise that would happen. Back in December, that's what I know the former speaker was pushing for, was a roads-only package that would go before the voters. And working as a bipartisan package, that's where you got other things piled on, and it got very complicated as part of that. But we have a complicated tax system.
Right.
I think this is something where we need to address legislatively, and the people expect results, and they deserve to know, to know the truth and why we're doing some of the things that we're doing, and this is why I go into programs like yours.
And I'm glad you're here. Where's the governor in all of this? Because he has spoken a lot about it. He seems to like looking at the tax structure, be it sales tax, be it fuel tax, maybe a combination of both, because in the end, you need governor buy-in. Yep. And where do you think he comes into this conversation?
I sit down with him once a week with the leadership, and so he presented his plan about 2 years ago that would be a user fee system that would raise the gas and diesel tax and increase registration fees. He is working with the legislative leaders here in the House and the Senate, and he wants to see a roads package done this year.
Roads only.
And so that's what he's been working with the legislature on, and having us work on seeing where the votes are in the House and the Senate. Because you have 148 members.
You do.
And it's just like a family. Even with 5 members or 3 members, you usually have twice as many ideas as you have people in the family. And so trying to work through what's able to get the 56 votes in the House to pass, what's able to get the 20 votes in the Senate to pass, and what's able to get the 1 signature from the governor.
His name is Aric Nesbitt. He is a member of the Michigan State House. My name is Brad Pomerantz. You are watching Charter Local Edition.